funniest times was when I was in Nevada visiting a friend. It was during election season, so I didn't answer my phone if I didn't know the number. And a phone call comes in from our hometown. Didn't know the number, but I answered anyway. And somebody asked for Randy, and I was able to say, he's not here. I'm not in town. And he said, oh, we have, somebody got hurt, and the firefighter said to call Randy because he would take care of her. And I said, tell you what, you call 911, I'll call Randy, and we'll take care of you. So I called Randy, and I said, you're about to get a page, so dash to this address, and here's the problem. And he said, wait, how do you know I've got this page coming? Tried to explain it, but the pager went off. And again, he was the only one there the night of tonight, the title of tonight's talk. So let's welcome Randy Cassingham. Here's Randy.
Thanks so much for coming. I'll start by saying this is our actual environment. This is a very rural area, and this is a concrete truck driver that missed a curve. And this fence is Ralph Lauren's. He has a tiny little ranch here. It's about 17,000 acres. So he's got it from the top of the hill all the way down to the highway, which is absolutely crazy. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was a big fan of Dragnet and Adam 12. This is not me. It's Canadian actor Lee Montgomery in an early role. At the time, I thought, I might want to be a cop. But another show attracted me even more. You know these guys? Johnny and Roy on the TV show Emergency. After high school, when I graduated in 1977, I went into EMS, the Cadillac days. Do you know why they used Cadillacs in those days? No, not lots of room. They were really tiny. Because they had a really smooth ride, and what they were really built for was hearses. And the early ambulance companies were funeral parlors. And so they just redressed them. So let me tell you about the environment in the 1970s as we were getting away from funeral parlors doubling as ambulance companies. When the Emergency show premiered in 1972, there were only 12 operating paramedic units in North America. 12. Yet just 10 years later, after the show debuted, there was a paramedic unit within 10 minutes of more than half of all Americans. And like Dragnet and Adam 12 did for cops, the Emergency TV show set the professional standard for medics, who went on to save lives not just in the US, but around the world, to emulate that TV show. So really, things moved along amazingly quickly, and so did I. In San Francisco, I was evaluated as an excellent driver, so I got to drive the prima donna paramedic of the company in the company's brand new flagship vehicle, because of course that was assigned to the prima donna paramedic. He was a jerk, but he was a good paramedic who specialized in neonatal intensive care. But I decided that I needed to go to college, and my certifications helped me get a school job pretty quickly and help with school expenses. Arcata is a town on the Northern California coast. The Mad River, which flows through town, figures in too. And I upgraded my certification to advanced life support, just like it says in the vehicle. It's a basic paramedic level. This was my favorite ambulance there. Despite its size, it was smooth as glass at 117 miles per hour. You can ask me later how I know. So here's me in 1983 at a crash using a now completely discredited method of spinal immobilization. The backboard isn't the problem, it's the sandbags to hold the head still. What happens if the patient starts throwing up and you need to tilt them on their side? Oops. So if you think this is uncomfortable, the newer way was to tape your forehead and C-collar to the backboard. You'll be happy to know that today we have multiple protocols to rule out spinal injuries, so in 95% of the cases where we would backboard a crash victim, we don't need to do this at all. I found EMS was fun, interesting, and rewarding, except financially, but also very serious. I was the medic on this call on the shore of the Mad River, which actually has a very meandering flow. It's not mad at all. But damn, we medics hate losing a child. We want kids to grow up. And if they make dumb mistakes as an adult or are unfortunate and have some medical problem, then so be it, and we'll help them if we can. But we remember being kids ourselves and know that sometimes we were lucky to survive childhood, so we think kids need to grow up and they need to outlive their parents. And this is why I titled this talk, The Only One There. Well, my driver on this call was an EMT. On a call like this, everything is on the advanced life support medic, in this case, me. Ivor could do things like grab a drug out of my drug box and even prep it for me, but I had to perform any and all advanced procedures until we could get this kid to the hospital. A really experienced EMT is worth their weight in gold and can give great suggestions to an advanced medic. Ivar wasn't all that experienced, but he confidently did anything I told him without hesitation. I vividly remember working on this boy in the back of that ambulance, with Ivar doing the heart compressions unless I said to stop, like to check for any sort of heart rhythm. The story here says the man found the boy in the river after looking for 20 minutes and ran him up to the ambulance just as we arrived. And that's absolutely true. He handed him to me, and Ivor and I put him on our gurney and put him in the ambulance so I could get to work. This is the cardiac monitor defibrillator we had at the time. Notice the paddles in the lid there. You've seen those on TV. They'll figure in later too. This beast weighed around 40 pounds and it was just one of the things I had to carry into houses. And that's one of the reasons I have shoulder problems to this day. And it's what I was using to try to get that boy's heart beating again. I was intently focused on this kid. Drugs, shocks, nothing helped. It was surreal, and I finally looked up and saw the back doors were still open, and a crowd had gathered to watch. In the crowd was the man who rescued the kid. For the first time I noticed, he was stark naked. I asked him to close the doors. And after working on the boy for a bit, I told my driver to get us going to the hospital. Especially then, there was only so much we could do in the field, and as the story says, he didn't make it. I'm not haunted by this conclusion. I know with certainty that he was in the water for too long and nothing would have brought him back. But did you know that street medics have about double the incidence of PTSD than war zone soldiers? That's largely because medics serve longer than soldiers. We see shootings, suicides, car crashes, murders, broken hips, heart attacks, strokes, and anything else you can think of. I did end up with what I call mild PTSD, but ironically, it was from the first months of my service back in one of those Cadillac ambulances. But I stayed with it until I graduated college 8 years later. And it was only this year that a brilliant psychiatrist zeroed in on the exact moment that triggered my PTSD during our first and only session together. And I'm much more at peace even than I have been. And after college, I was amazingly lucky to land a job at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. JPL is the NASA center responsible for sending robotic probes to other planets, like the Voyager missions that are now the most distant human-made objects from Earth, and the Galileo probe to Saturn, which will be the subject of my next talk sometime down the road. It's not scheduled yet. And after 10 years with NASA, I got divorced, moved to Colorado to be a full-time writer and publisher, met and married Kip, and after 8 years in Boulder, we moved to the rural western part of the state in 2003. After we settled in, the county hired a new EMS director from San Francisco. A neighbor told him about me, and that new chief asked me to come to his office to talk. Turns out we didn't know each other in San Francisco, but we sure do know a lot of people in common. Though he didn't call me in to talk about old times. He asked me if I would consider recertifying as a medic, because on the mesa where we lived, it took 20 to 30 minutes for an ambulance to get to emergencies. The fire departments were all volunteers, and they were there to fight fires. They didn't have any medical training, whatever. He needed trained, self-sufficient people to get there and keep patients alive until an ambulance could get there. And he needed someone with experience to lead them. You know, be the only one there for around 20 minutes every damn time. He wanted me to help establish a corps of volunteers to get certified to at least the medical first responder level and be their field supervisor, the captain of the squad. As captain, I'd even be paid. $40 a month. Plus $20 a call if they transported a patient. At the time, the entire county averaged around 5 calls a week. The county is 550 square miles with around 4,500 residents and 2 ambulances, but no hospital. The only reason we had as many calls as we did is it's a big tourist area, and we could count on at least one tourist rolling an ATV off a cliff every summer. It was us and only us until we could deliver patients to an emergency room at the hospital in the next county, hopefully within an hour of when somebody called 911. That 1 hour goal was sometimes impossible to meet. But sure, what the heck? I worked from home, so I got my emergency medical technician certification back after a 22-year lapse. For me, studying was easy. All I needed to learn was what had changed in 22 years. But the real basics were and are still essentially the same. I was also certifying at a lower medic level, no longer an advanced life support medic, so that made it easy too. Though in Colorado we can get some add-on certifications, so I could still start IVs and still give even a couple of drugs. And Kit decided to also certify as an EMT and join the squad. But for her it was all new, so she really needed to study. This is a few of us in our dress whites for a cop's funeral procession. Kit is standing in front of me. I suppose you can see me. I'm not the tallest one there. She's also a very calm person and later went on to become a deputy coroner for our county. So while you might think you could never be a medic, she gladly took on the job I didn't like to do, telling the next of kin sometimes terrible news. She did that well, as she has the empathy to know what to say. This is one of the few photos I have of us working together. A neighbor took this photo with a crash between the tiny SUV and the big rig tow truck, which happened right in front of our house. Our driveway there was about a quarter mile long, but even that far away, I still heard the crash from inside the house. Kit's in the red pants, and I had just been on the radio to tell the rescue squad that we needed the jaws of life for the extrication of this driver, who we knew. The extrication team was a half hour away. Once again, just us for quite a while. The road the deputy sheriff is walking on is one of the primary non-highway roads in the county, and as you can see, it's packed dirt and gravel. This is a rural county. And yes, despite being fairly elderly, this patient, who was completely innocent, the tow truck decided to pass him just as the driver turned left, he survived. It was 1:05 a.m. on a Sunday morning when my pager went off. We were asleep. It was June 2009, which was a bad month for celebrities. That month, Michael Jackson died at 50. Farrah Fawcett died from cancer at 62. The pitchman Billy Mays also died at 50. One of my faves, comic actress Gilda Radner, also died of cancer. The message on my pager, man down on our mesa. The address was a 10-minute drive. Kit and I were by far the closest medics. As a supervisor, I had flashy lights and a siren on my personal car, which you may have noticed on the title slide. But at that time of night, it wasn't likely we'd even see another car in that 10 minutes. We would roll in silence. We were proud of the fact that we could go from sleep to garage door rolling up in about 1 minute. I told dispatch we were en route. That triggers the update from dispatch. A 50-year-old male, just like Michael Jackson, CPR in progress. Worst case scenario. Our patient is already dead. The question is, will that be permanent or can we change that fact? The good part is, Kit and I had 10 minutes to talk it through. How many of you out here have taken a CPR class? I can't really see you, so call out me. Oh, a lot of you, that's great. So, how many of you are currently certified in CPR? All right. Now, here's a question. How many of you ever done CPR on a real human being? All right, there's at least one. Well, not counting you, John. I know you have. It's a lot different from the mannequins, but doing it on a real person is not something people aren't sure of. You remember. Last question, how many of you would be scared to death to face the need to do it? Yeah, okay, you're honest. So back to it. So here and I, Kit, go rushing headlong into being the only people that are going to be there in this absolutely critical 10 to 20 minutes that will determine whether this man will be saved or stay dead. As I said, it was going to take 10 minutes to drive there, so we had time to talk. So I said to Kit, whoever is doing CPR, and we don't have any idea who, they're going to be tired by the time we get there in 10 minutes. What do you learn in the CPR class? Switch off every 2 minutes. And the odds are that person doesn't have anybody to switch with. So we drove up the driveway, found a place. I told Kit, when we get there, because that person is going to be tired, you just bolt into the house and take over CPR, and I'll grab our gear and follow you in. As the captain, I had the one defibrillator on the mesa. I was less than 30 seconds behind and entered the man's bedroom to find Kit on the floor with him doing CPR. It was the man's daughter who had done it while we were on the way, keeping him going until we arrived, and Kit took over for her. The first stroke of luck was the patient's daughter was visiting. She didn't live there. Mom was a hysterical type. The daughter was in nursing school. Her husband was also a nurse at the cardiac hospital in Mesa, Arizona. She got him on the phone and he talked her through CPR on her own father. Well, I got details on what was going on and the man's medical history from the wife and daughter. I was setting up the defibrillator. It uses sticky pads instead of the paddles, but it's the same idea. Pads work better because they stick really solidly and stay there because odds are you're going to need to shock more than once. Kit learned in CPR training to keep going while a second medic works the machine. She leaned out of the way while I stuck on one pad, and then she leaned on the other way while I stuck on the other, and she never missed a stroke pumping on his chest. When I was ready, I said stop while the machine checked to see if a shock was in order. Not all heart stoppage is the same. There has to be a shockable rhythm for a shock to do any good, not a flat line. When TV doctors shock a flat line, they're not doing it right. That's not how you do it. I made sure Kit was not touching the patient because medics have been killed when they got shocked accidentally by a defibrillator. While it charged, which takes a few seconds, we both make sure the man's daughter knew she was to stay clear too. She put up her hands, we got her nod, one last check, and I pushed the button. On TV, the person gets shocked, does a little jump. Those are actors. In real life, the patient jumps. He comes up off the floor, a violent convulsion. That is, if he's lucky. A good muscle convulsion indicates his tissues haven't started dying from the lack of oxygen. Our guy nearly came up off the floor. Good sign. And it worked. His heart started again. We got a pulse after just one shock. I still had to breathe for him with a respirator, but after a few minutes, he started breathing on his own. Kim, the paramedic on duty that night, was on her way in her own vehicle, and the ambulance was still a few minutes behind her. I updated her by radio that we had a pulse and respirations, but I was brief. We still had plenty of work to do since he was far from stable. And here we are with family gathered around us, looking to us for reassurance. That's very much a feeling of being alone, too. Kit and I looked at each other. The time from pulling into the driveway to shock, just 2 minutes. He's not dead anymore. He's alive, at least for now. Kim arrived in the bedroom and got a look at our patient's heart rhythm. It wasn't great, but at least he was perfusing. His lungs were getting oxygen to his blood. His heart was pumping it around. The ambulance was still several minutes away, so we talked about how we're going to get this guy out of the cramped bedroom, through the narrow hall, and down the narrow stairs. I was busy enough that I didn't even notice Kim was setting up an IV while we talked. But when a constricting band landed on his chest right in front of me, I noticed. I slapped it on his arm, and immediately a small but firm vein popped up on the inside of his forearm. "Give me an 18-gauge needle and I can get that," I said, even though it's really tiny. And Kim handed me one, and I had it in so fast she wasn't ready to hand me the tubing yet. But I held it while she finished, and we now had a secure drug route to help stabilize his heart. The ambulance arrived, and the task turned to getting him into the ambulance. I had sprained my knee the previous week, so I knew I wouldn't be able to help carry the patient, especially since I had spent the last 15 minutes kneeling on the floor. I started taking stuff out to the various vehicles, such as Kim's bag, while the others moved the still unconscious patient to the ambulance. Because the patient was still critical, Kim wanted an extra medic to go along. Kit was actually the first in, so I called out to her to see if she wanted to go in for the ride, but she was inside getting stuff after helping the patient's dazed wife get into the front seat, so I just told the driver, "Go." And that was the start of another 20-minute waiting period, the ride to the hospital, even though we were right at the county line. At one point, the driver slammed on the brakes and a deer bounded in front of us. It's another hazard of rural areas. As Kim started pumping in drugs to help stabilize his heart through the IV, I called ahead to the hospital to tell them what to expect. Happily, things were quiet there on an early Sunday morning. And as we were leaving the emergency room, we saw the medical helicopter crew come in with an empty gurney. They were taking our patient to the bigger hospital 60 miles north. I called Kit to say we were on our way back, and she drove down to the highway so the ambulance could drop me off. We went back to bed, but we didn't go back to sleep. We were both absolutely high on the feeling we had, and we each went over every detail of the call from our own points of view. But the bottom line was we'd gotten him back. Now all we had to do was see if he'd ever got out of the hospital. Kit and I had to go out of town from Monday through Friday, but we stopped by the patient's house the next weekend to see if we could find out how he was doing. And his daughter was still there. She told us that her dad had not only survived, but he was going to get out of the hospital soon, 8 days after we took him in. And this is what came out in the local newspaper this time. A couple of days later, I was in my office when the phone rang, and I answered it because it was local. The caller said his name, Mike, and it took me a second to realize who it was, our patient. He wanted to say thanks, and I asked him if we could come visit him, and he seemed pleased to agree. He and his wife had some questions about what went on that morning, and filled in some details for us, too. He has no brain damage whatever, which confirms his daughter was doing great CPR. Which brings me to my point. Sometimes it really seems like we're all alone when we're not. That night, Mike's daughter, Becky, was part of my team, the team that made this headline happen. And it was a headline because it was the first CPR save in the county since the new chief got there several years before. And the funny thing is, the week we were out of town, our crews had 2 more saves. Though one of them later died in the hospital, the other went back to a normal life also. Our save, sure as hell, wasn't just me, or even me and Kit. Becky kept her cool and kept her daddy going long enough for someone to get there with a defibrillator. Becky got there quickly because she heard her mom scream and started CPR within a minute. Becky's husband was part of the team too. Becky almost certainly had CPR training, but he coached her through it. It was probably her first time, and it was on her dad. And that still tears me up after all these years. And here's an important point. She was alone and only did compressions. Mike took no breaths from the time he dropped in his bedroom until I used a resuscitator on him, 12, 14 minutes later? Just the compressions move a little air, enough air. So Becky was the real first responder. Her husband helped too, and then Kit, and then me, and Kim, and the doctors and nurses at the hospital. And every time I ran into Mike in town, he'd come over to shake my hand because he gets to watch his grandkids grow up. Damn, that's humbling to be part of that story. A story summarized by this on my right arm. So some of you have asked me about my tattoo. That's the story behind it. This is Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, holding his staff in his hand and fighting off the specter of death, but always with the understanding that death will win in the end. Notice his staff has one snake, not two. It was a single officer in the U.S. Army who blew off Asclepius because he thought that Caduceus, the staff carried by the Greek god Hermes, looked cooler. Hermes is the protector of travelers, merchants, and thieves. It's not wise to blow off the Greek god you want on your side. Is it any wonder that medicine is so expensive these days? The symbol of EMS is the star of life, and look what's right in the middle. The staff of Asclepius, not the caduceus like on the army seal, for 100 years. And it really is just about 100 years because the army has seen the error of its ways and has moved to the staff or rod of Asclepius. To wrap this up, I'm going to circle back to the TV show, Emergency. Paramedic Johnny Gage on the show was played by actor Randy Mantooth. To this day, Randy goes to EMS conferences to shake hands with who he calls the true heroes of EMS. I'm just an actor, he tells us. Maybe. But he continues to inspire people to go into this very rewarding, except financially, profession. And it was my pleasure to meet him and thank him for inspiring me. This was in 2013. He and his partner on the show, Kevin Ty, recently finished up filming a documentary about the history of paramedics called Into the Unknown. I'm not sure when that's going to be released, but I'm looking forward to it. My medical certifications expire in February. So if you're afraid of doing CPR, I'm going to shock you. I'm going to tell you right now, don't do it. But do learn how to do proper chest compressions because that is enough to keep someone alive even for 10 minutes or more. If you end up saving someone's life, I can tell you that the great feeling you'll get will last you for the rest of your life. So any questions about what I was doing or EMS in general or help you diagnose some problem?
Did the daughter break any of your father's chest bones?
Did the daughter break any of his ribs? Probably not, because he was still fairly young. Usually it's not the ribs that break, it's the cartilage that holds them all together to your sternum. And that gets brittle when you get older. And when you first do that first compression, sometimes you hear this crunch and you go, oh. But it's usually just the cartilage breaking free a little bit.
How do you know the vehicle went 117 miles?
How do I know that ambulance was smooth as glass at 117? This was a college town, and one of the college kids, somebody I know, decided to go to the beach, and 17 kids wanted to go with him. So there were 18 kids in his mini pickup truck, a lot of them in the back, and he oversteered and rolled it. I wasn't on duty, but when I heard that come out, I just headed for the ambulance base. And so I was second in Unit 12 there, GMC. The manager of the ambulance company happened to be a mechanic before he married the boss's daughter. He had that tuned beautifully. And as the second one in, they gave me the most critical patient, and that was a bad head injury. Big surprise, a head injury from somebody getting thrown out of the back of a pickup truck. And the hospital that had a CAT scanner was about half an hour down the road. And it was late at night again, and no traffic, and a nice, straight, well-lit freeway where I could see for miles. I went through the red light at the intersection to get on the freeway at about 60 because I could see about 2 miles in every direction, and knew that there was nobody coming. And I just said, let's see what this thing can do. And the answer was 117. So, hey, thanks. Now I don't have to explain that story 17 different times or more. Any other questions?